What if I told you that the very first mistake most people make in their Stoic journey is also the most common misunderstanding of Stoicism itself? That they confuse Stoicism not with strength, but with suppression, with the misguided belief that to be Stoic is to feel nothing, to experience life as a cold and unaffected observer, untouched by grief, by joy, by love, by sorrow. And yet, nothing could be further from the truth. This is the first, and perhaps most tragic error, believing that Stoicism demands the eradication of emotion rather than its proper understanding and governance. It is this misconception that has led many modern aspirants of Stoicism into a state of quiet inner turmoil, where they shame themselves for their feelings, deny their natural human responses, and equate vulnerability with weakness. But the Stoics themselves, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, never advocated for such lifeless detachment. The Stoic journey is not about the denial of emotions, but about the mastery of passions, path in Greek, those disordered emotional responses that arise not from reason, but from mistaken judgments about what is good or bad. To be Stoic is not to feel less, but to feel wisely. It is not to harden oneself against the experiences of life, but to open oneself to them fully, without being enslaved by them. Imagine for a moment a man who has embraced Stoicism as suppression. He receives bad news. Perhaps a loved one has fallen ill, or he has lost an important opportunity. He tells himself, "I must not feel anything. To be Stoic is to be indifferent." And so he pushes down the rising sadness, the surge of frustration. He forces a blank expression, a monotone voice, and congratulates himself on his composure. But inside, the grief festers, unacknowledged, unprocessed. Over time, he grows cold, disconnected not only from others but from himself. His relationships suffer, his sense of purpose wanes, and his supposed Stoicism becomes a mask, a prison. The true Stoic, by contrast, faces the same news but responds differently. He allows himself to feel the initial wave of emotion, recognizing it as a natural human reaction. He does not pretend that it does not hurt, nor does he chastise himself for his humanity. But he also does not let the emotion dictate his actions or beliefs. He reflects, is this event within my control? Does this misfortune diminish my capacity to live virtuously? And with this reflection, he restores his equilibrium, not by suppressing his feelings, but by aligning his judgments with reason. Marcus Aurelius himself wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Notice that he does not say, "You have power over your feelings." He acknowledges that feelings arise spontaneously, as part of our nature. But we have power over our mind, over how we interpret those feelings, how we choose to respond to them, and how we allow them to shape our actions. The first major mistake in the Stoic journey, then, is to conflate equanimity with emotional numbness. Equanimity is the state of inner balance that allows one to feel deeply without being carried away by those feelings. It is the practiced ability to sit with grief without collapsing into despair, to experience joy without becoming dependent upon it, to feel anger without being consumed by it. Seneca elaborates on this point with profound clarity. In his letter to Lucilius, he writes, "No man can be brave who considers pain the greatest evil of life, nor temperate who regards pleasure as the highest good." Here, Seneca does not advocate for the absence of pain or pleasure, but for the proper valuation of them. Pain and pleasure are not inherently good or bad. They are indifferent in the Stoic sense, neither to be pursued nor avoided for their own sake, but to be integrated wisely into a life governed by virtue. The suppression of emotion leads to another grave consequence. It fractures the self. The individual begins to live a divided existence, outwardly composed but inwardly in conflict. The feelings that are repressed do not vanish. They find other, often more destructive, channels of expression through chronic stress, relational dysfunction, or sudden outbursts that seem inexplicable and contrary to the individual's self-image. The Stoic, by contrast, seeks integration, the harmonization of reason and emotion, where feelings are acknowledged and examined, but not given unchecked authority over the self. He cultivates what the ancients called eupatheiai, good emotions such as rational joy, noble desire, and justified aversion. These are the emotional expressions that arise when our judgments are aligned with nature and virtue. Consider the example of Epictetus, who lived much of his life as a slave, yet spoke with compassion, humor, and humility. He did not suppress his feelings, but understood them, contextualized them, and transformed them into fuel for philosophical reflection. He taught his students not to avoid feeling, but to avoid being misled by feeling. To avoid the first major mistake in the Stoic journey, therefore, is to embrace emotional literacy as an essential Stoic practice. It is to cultivate the habit of noticing what one feels, asking why one feels it, and discerning whether that feeling reflects a true or false judgment about what matters. For instance, if I feel jealousy, I must ask, am I disturbed because someone else has something I lack? Do I believe that their possession diminishes my worth or happiness? Is that belief consistent with Stoic wisdom? Often, the very act of such inquiry reveals that the emotional disturbance is rooted in a false valuation, that I have assigned too much importance to external goods, forgetting that my true good lies in virtue alone. Moreover, this approach transforms emotions from obstacles into allies. Fear, for example, alerts me to potential danger. If I examine that fear and find it justified, I can take rational action to mitigate risk. If I find it exaggerated, I can release it. Similarly, grief reveals the depth of my attachment to someone or something I value. Rather than suppressing grief, I can honor it, reflect on the nature of impermanence, and reaffirm my commitment to live virtuously despite the pain of loss. In this way, Stoicism becomes not a philosophy of repression, but a philosophy of courageous engagement with the full range of human experience. It teaches us not to retreat from life's emotional landscape, but to navigate it with wisdom, integrity, and grace. To the modern practitioner of Stoicism, then, the first imperative is clear. Reject the false ideal of emotional suppression. Instead, cultivate the strength to feel fully, the clarity to understand what you feel, and the wisdom to act in accordance with virtue rather than impulse. As we prepare to move into the next block, where we will examine the second major mistake, the confusion of Stoic acceptance with passivity, let us internalize this foundational insight, that Stoicism is not the absence of emotion, but the presence of reason. It is not about becoming less human, but about becoming more fully human, capable of feeling, thinking, and acting in a manner that is both courageous and compassionate. The Stoic does not seek to extinguish the fire of emotion, but to tend it wisely, allowing it to illuminate the path of virtue rather than to consume him in destructive passion. Having dismantled the first great error, the suppression of emotion, we now arrive at the second major mistake in the Stoic journey, the confusion between Stoic acceptance and passive resignation. This mistake is subtle, yet insidious, for it disguises itself as virtue while undermining the very essence of Stoic practice. To the untrained eye, Stoic acceptance and resignation may appear identical. Both involve a recognition of what is beyond one's control, a cessation of futile striving against the inevitable. But beneath this superficial similarity lies a profound difference in orientation and consequence. Passive resignation is characterized by a spirit of defeat. It whispers, "There's nothing I can do, so why bother?" It is the quiet surrender of agency, the relinquishment not only of action but of responsibility. It is the abandonment of one's role as a moral agent in the universe. Stoic acceptance, by contrast, is an act of strength, not surrender. It acknowledges the limits of control without abdicating the duty to act where action is possible and necessary. It is a posture of engaged realism, not weary fatalism. Consider the Stoic archer, a metaphor beloved by Epictetus. The archer prepares his bow, aims with skill, releases the arrow, all within his power. But once the arrow is loosed, its flight is subject to factors beyond his control. The wind, the movement of the target, the imperfections of the equipment. The Stoic accepts these uncertainties with equanimity, but does not therefore conclude that aiming the bow was pointless. The mistake of passive resignation occurs when the practitioner, confronting the uncontrollable, extrapolates this recognition to all areas of life, retreating from effort altogether. If much of life is determined by fate, he reasons, then why strive at all? Why resist injustice? Why pursue excellence? Why engage with the world's messiness when I can withdraw into my private citadel of indifference? But this is not Stoicism. It is nihilism in disguise. The true Stoic understands that while the outcomes of actions may be beyond control, the actions themselves remain within the domain of moral responsibility. Marcus Aurelius did not abdicate his duties as emperor because he recognized the inevitability of suffering and death. On the contrary, his meditations reveal a man relentlessly committed to the obligations of his role, despite, and because of, the transient and often tragic nature of human affairs. He writes, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." This is the clarion call of Stoic acceptance. Not to argue, not to retreat, but to act wisely, justly, courageously, within the bounds of what is possible. Passive resignation seduces with the promise of relief from struggle, but it exacts a terrible price: the erosion of one's sense of agency, purpose, and dignity. The Stoic, by contrast, embraces struggle as the very arena in which virtue is forged. Let us consider a practical example. Imagine someone who, having been treated unjustly in their workplace, reflects, "There is no justice in the world. People will always act out of self-interest. I cannot control this. Therefore, I will remain silent and endure the mistreatment." This is resignation. It may masquerade as Stoic endurance, but it is, in fact, a quiet collusion with vice. The true Stoic response would differ fundamentally. It would begin with the acknowledgement, "I cannot control the actions of others, nor can I guarantee that justice will prevail." But it would continue, "Yet I can control whether I speak the truth, whether I stand up for what is right, whether I uphold my own integrity, regardless of the outcome." Stoic acceptance galvanizes action precisely because it frees the practitioner from the paralysis of outcome dependence. The fear of failure, rejection, or futility no longer deters action, for the Stoic acts not for the guarantee of success, but for the fulfillment of duty. Epictetus puts it plainly, you are not responsible for the outcome, only for the action. This principle liberates the Stoic from the exhausting need to control results, while simultaneously deepening his commitment to act virtuously. Moreover, Stoic acceptance fosters resilience, not apathy. The Stoic, by accepting the vicissitudes of fortune, becomes less susceptible to despair when things go awry. But he does not cease to care. Rather, he cares more wisely. He redirects his energies from the futile battle against what is fixed by fate to the fertile ground of what is malleable through choice. Seneca illustrates this beautifully when he writes, "Fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling." The Stoic chooses to be led, to align his will with nature's course, not because he is indifferent, but because he recognizes that resistance to the inevitable is a source of needless suffering and distraction from the pursuit of virtue. Another critical distinction between Stoic acceptance and passive resignation lies in their respective impacts on the cultivation of the virtues. Passive resignation atrophies courage, for it teaches the practitioner to shrink from engagement. It undermines justice, for it excuses complicity with wrongs. It erodes wisdom, for it discourages the ongoing reflection necessary for ethical discernment. And it distorts temperance, turning it from the disciplined moderation of desires into the brittle suppression of all desires. Stoic acceptance, by contrast, nourishes these virtues. It calls forth courage, for it demands that one face reality as it is, without illusion or avoidance. It deepens justice, for it requires that one act rightly even in a world where right action is no guarantee of reward. It refines wisdom, for it compels continual examination of what is within one's power and what is not. And it perfects temperance, for it teaches the practitioner to desire only what is within reach, and to relinquish attachment to all else. The risk of conflating acceptance with resignation is particularly acute in moments of personal failure or loss. When a cherished goal is thwarted, when a relationship ends, when illness strikes, the temptation to retreat into passivity can be overwhelming. The inner voice may say, "Why bother trying again? Why open myself to further disappointment? Why not simply detach from all striving and accept whatever comes?" But the Stoic must answer this voice with clarity, because striving itself is part of my nature as a rational being, because to act in accordance with reason and virtue is my purpose, regardless of external outcomes, because my flourishing depends not on what happens to me, but on how I respond. This is the Stoic paradox, that acceptance of fate does not negate the imperative to act. It grounds it. The misinterpretation of acceptance as resignation also impoverishes the relational dimension of life. If I resign myself to the belief that people will always disappoint, betray, or harm, I may withdraw from intimacy, from community, from service. But in doing so, I not only impoverish my own life, but also abdicate my role in contributing to the common good. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, "What injures the hive injures the bee." The Stoic is not an isolated monolith, but a participant in the broader human community. Acceptance of others' imperfections does not excuse withdrawal, but calls for the practice of patience, compassion, and wise engagement. To avoid this second major mistake, then, the Stoic practitioner must cultivate a vigilant awareness of the distinction between acceptance and resignation. He must ask himself, am I ceasing to strive because I have judged that further effort would be contrary to reason and virtue, or because I am afraid of failure, discomfort, or uncertainty? This reflective questioning is essential, for the line between acceptance and resignation is often thin and shifting. It requires ongoing self-examination, the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about one's motives, and the humility to recalibrate when one recognizes that one has slipped into passivity. The Stoic must also be wary of cultural narratives that valorize resignation under the guise of acceptance. In an age often enamored with the language of letting go, detaching, and moving on, it is easy to mistake disengagement for wisdom. But the Stoic does not let go of effort where effort is still possible and virtuous. He does not detach from the world, but from false judgments about the world. He moves on not from his responsibilities, but from his illusions. In sum, the second major mistake in the Stoic journey is to conflate acceptance with resignation, to mistake the relinquishment of outcome dependence for the relinquishment of all striving. The remedy is to cultivate a robust commitment to action rooted in virtue, guided by reason, and liberated from the tyranny of results. As we prepare to move into the next block, where we will explore the third major mistake, the tendency to isolate Stoicism from emotion and community, let us carry forward this essential insight: that the Stoic path is one of engaged acceptance, not passive resignation. It is a path that calls for the full participation of the self in the drama of human life, not as a detached spectator, but as an active, purposeful, and virtuous agent. The Stoic does not retreat from the world, but steps into it more fully, armed with the clarity of what he can and cannot control, and animated by the unwavering commitment to live in accordance with nature, reason, and virtue. The third major mistake in the Stoic journey is perhaps the most quietly corrosive: the belief that to be a Stoic is to be fundamentally solitary, to walk the path of virtue alone, insulated from the messiness, dependency, and unpredictability of human relationships. This mistake arises from a romanticized image of the Stoic as a self-sufficient monolith, independent, detached, and emotionally invulnerable. It is the myth of the solitary sage, who, in his austere wisdom, withdraws from the web of human entanglement to dwell in serene isolation. Yet nothing could be further from the Stoic ideal. To understand this error, we must return to one of the core principles of Stoic philosophy: that human beings are by nature social creatures, zoon politikon, as Aristotle termed it, and as the Stoics affirmed. Our rationality is not meant for private speculation alone, but for participation in the shared project of communal life. We are born into a world of relationships, of roles and obligations, of mutual dependency and reciprocal care. To attempt to isolate Stoicism from this social reality is to sever it from its living context and reduce it to an arid intellectual exercise. Marcus Aurelius, often miscast as the emblem of the solitary Stoic, wrote with profound tenderness about the interconnectedness of all things. What brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee. Here lies the heart of Stoic social philosophy, that we flourish not in isolation but in cooperation, in service to the whole of which we are a part. The error of isolating Stoicism from community often stems from a misinterpretation of the Stoic emphasis on self-sufficiency. It is true that the Stoic seeks autarkeia, independence from external circumstances in the pursuit of inner virtue. But this does not mean that the Stoic rejects all social bonds, or that he withdraws from the duties and joys of human connection. Rather, it means that he does not make his inner peace contingent upon the actions or opinions of others. The difference is subtle but vital. The Stoic does not say, "I need no one." He says, "I am prepared to live virtuously, regardless of who is with me or against me. This resilience is what enables him to engage fully in relationships without becoming enslaved by them. When the Stoic isolates himself, mistaking detachment for indifference, he impoverishes both his life and his character. He deprives himself of the essential context in which virtues like justice, courage, patience, and compassion are most fully expressed. For how does one practice justice alone? How does one cultivate patience without the friction of human interaction? How does one learn compassion in the absence of others' suffering? The Stoic's commitment to community is not merely pragmatic, but metaphysical. As rational beings, we share in the logos, the rational principle that orders the cosmos. This shared rationality is the basis of our kinship with all other human beings, regardless of status, nationality, or temperament. To withdraw from community is, therefore, to deny an essential part of one's nature. Seneca, perhaps the most relational of the Stoic writers, frequently emphasized the importance of friendship. In his letters to Lucilius, he wrote, "There is no enjoying the possession of anything valuable unless one has someone to share it with." Here we see that even the Stoic sage seeks companionship, not as a source of emotional dependency, but as an arena for mutual growth and shared virtue. The mistake of isolating Stoicism from community often arises in response to the inevitable disappointments of human interaction: betrayal, misunderstanding, conflict, rejection. Faced with these pains, the aspiring Stoic may conclude, "Better to withdraw entirely, to cultivate my virtue in solitude, where no one can harm me." But this is to confuse the avoidance of pain with the pursuit of wisdom. The Stoic knows that human relationships are fraught with imperfection. People will fail us, and we will fail them. But these very imperfections are the crucible in which Stoic virtue is tested and refined. Without the challenges posed by relational life, the Stoic's virtues remain theoretical, unproven by the rigors of lived experience. Consider the example of a Stoic who retreats from all intimate relationships to avoid the vulnerability of attachment. He tells himself that this is a Stoic choice, that by renouncing the bonds of friendship, partnership, or family, he is safeguarding his inner tranquility. Yet, over time, he may find that his life grows narrower, colder, more brittle. His capacity for empathy diminishes. His understanding of others' experiences becomes abstract and detached. The Stoic tradition offers a corrective to this error in the concept of oikeiosis, the natural progression by which human beings extend their care beyond themselves, first to family, then to friends, to their community, and ultimately to all of humanity. This process of moral expansion is not optional, but integral to Stoic ethical development. Epictetus, whose life as a former slave could have justified a retreat from social engagement, instead taught the necessity of fulfilling one's social roles with integrity and care. He reminded his students that we are all members of multiple social circles, as children, siblings, parents, citizens, and that each role carries corresponding duties. To isolate oneself from these roles is not Stoic strength, but a failure of courage and commitment. Moreover, the Stoic recognizes that participation in community does not require the sacrifice of inner freedom. It is possible, indeed necessary, to engage with others while maintaining the sovereignty of one's rational will. This is the essence of Stoic cosmopolitanism: to live as a citizen of the world, bound by universal reason, while remaining grounded in the inner citadel of one's own moral purpose. The danger of isolation is further compounded by the modern cultural valorization of radical independence and self-sufficiency. In a society that often prizes autonomy above all else, it is tempting to interpret Stoicism through this lens, as a philosophy that champions isolation as the pinnacle of strength. But this is a distortion of the Stoic vision. The Stoic does not seek to stand alone for the sake of standing alone. He stands firm in his principles, but he walks alongside others, recognizing that his flourishing is intertwined with theirs. He offers help when it is needed, accepts help when it is offered, and understands that mutual support is not a sign of weakness, but of shared humanity. To avoid this third major mistake, the Stoic practitioner must actively cultivate relationships that support the pursuit of virtue. He must seek out friends who challenge him to grow, who provide honest feedback, who share in the joys and sorrows of life. He must contribute to his community, not out of obligation alone, but as an expression of his nature as a social being. At the same time, he must guard against the entanglements that compromise his moral autonomy. He must distinguish between healthy interdependence and unhealthy codependence, between relationships that nourish virtue and those that erode it. This balance between engagement and independence, between community and self-sufficiency, is one of the most delicate and demanding aspects of the Stoic path. It requires continual reflection, the courage to enter into relational vulnerability, and the wisdom to set appropriate boundaries. As we prepare to move into the next block, where we will explore the fourth and final major mistake, the neglect of practice in favor of theory, let us carry forward this essential insight: that Stoicism is not a solitary endeavor, but a communal practice. It is lived most fully not in isolation, but in the context of relationships, roles, and responsibilities. The Stoic does not flee from the world's messiness, but steps into it with clarity, resilience, and compassion, knowing that it is precisely within the complexity of human connection that virtue is most profoundly expressed and tested. Now, some exciting news. Our channel now offers a members club. By joining it, you'll unlock exclusive benefits, deeper content dives, and personal insights. Join us on this journey, and let's build a meaningful life together. And I also humbly ask you to leave a comment, as it helps my channel immensely. If you do not know what to comment, just write "better" every day, so I know you reached this far. And don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Also, I've linked some books on Stoicism that helped me become the man I am today, and will also help you achieve a Stoic mindset. The fourth major mistake in the Stoic journey is perhaps the most ironic of all: the neglect of practice in favor of theory. It is the trap of intellectual Stoicism, where the aspirant becomes so enamored with reading, debating, and dissecting Stoic texts that he forgets the fundamental purpose of the philosophy itself: to be lived. Stoicism was never meant to be a purely academic discipline, confined to lectures, books, and scholarly treatises. It is, at its core, a practical art, a guide for how to live well, how to endure misfortune with grace, how to cultivate virtue through the trials of everyday existence. To approach Stoicism merely as an intellectual hobby is to miss its transformative power entirely. And yet, this is precisely the mistake that many modern Stoics make. They memorize the aphorisms of Epictetus, quote the meditations of Marcus Aurelius on social media, and argue over the finer points of Chrysippus's logic. But when life confronts them with loss, betrayal, illness, or injustice, they falter. Their theoretical knowledge provides no refuge, for it has not been embodied through sustained practice. This is what Seneca warned against when he wrote, "Philosophy teaches us to act, not to speak." He chided those who prided themselves on their eloquence about virtue, but failed to translate that eloquence into virtuous conduct. The Stoic life, for Seneca, was not to be demonstrated through rhetoric, but through character, through how one rises each morning, conducts oneself with others, endures hardship, and faces death. The paralysis of intellectual stoicism is particularly seductive in an age saturated with information. Never before has it been easier to access the entirety of Stoic literature, to participate in online forums, to listen to countless podcasts dissecting Stoic thought. And yet, paradoxically, never before has it been easier to mistake this consumption of Stoic content for the cultivation of a Stoic life. The Stoic understands that knowledge alone is insufficient. Knowledge must be applied, wisdom must be embodied. Otherwise, it is like a sword left sheathed, sharp but useless. The ancient Stoics referred to this practical application as ascesis, exercise, training. Just as the athlete trains his body through repeated effort, so too must the Stoic train his soul through the daily practice of philosophical exercises. These exercises are numerous and varied. The premeditatio malorum, in which one envisions potential misfortunes to prepare the mind for adversity. The evening reflection, in which one reviews the day's actions and identifies areas for improvement. The practice of voluntary discomfort, to cultivate resilience and diminish the tyranny of pleasure and fear. And the constant distinction between what is within one's control and what is not. Each of these practices serves to internalize Stoic principles, transforming them from abstract concepts into lived dispositions. Without such practices, Stoicism remains brittle and superficial, impressive in conversation but impotent in crisis. Consider, for example, the aspirant who has read extensively about the Stoic ideal of apatheia, freedom from destructive passions. He can recite the Stoic hierarchy of values, explain the nature of indifference, and argue persuasively about the Stoic conception of fate. Yet, when confronted with a minor insult, he bristles with indignation, retaliates impulsively, and later rationalizes his outburst by citing how even Stoics are human. Here we see the gap between theory and practice laid bare. The aspirant knows what Stoicism teaches, but has not trained himself to live accordingly. He has neglected the daily exercises that would have prepared him to pause, reflect, and respond with equanimity. The true Stoic practitioner, by contrast, views every interaction, every challenge, every discomfort as an opportunity for practice. He does not merely study Stoicism in the quiet of his study, but brings it into the marketplace, the courtroom, the battlefield, the family dinner. He understands that philosophy is most needed not when life is calm, but when it is chaotic. Epictetus emphasized this point with characteristic directness. Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. He saw the danger of those who could lecture on Stoic doctrines but collapsed under the slightest pressure. For Epictetus, the proof of philosophy's worth lay not in intellectual mastery, but in moral resilience. Neglecting practice in favor of theory also reinforces the illusion that Stoicism is about achieving a static state of perfected wisdom. The intellectual Stoic imagines that once he has read enough, understood enough, and discussed enough, he will arrive at a plateau of Stoic enlightenment, beyond which no further effort is required. But the lived Stoic knows that the journey is endless. As Marcus Aurelius confessed, "You must build up your life action by action, and be content if each one achieves its goal as far as possible. He did not portray himself as a finished sage, but as a perpetual student of virtue, striving daily to align his actions with his principles. The neglect of practice also undermines one of Stoicism's most profound psychological benefits, the cultivation of resilience. The Stoic practices voluntary discomfort not to demonstrate toughness, but to prepare himself for the inevitable adversities of life. He rehearses poverty, loss, criticism, and hardship, so that when these arrive, as they must, he meets them not with surprise and panic, but with preparedness and poise. The intellectual Stoic, having neglected such practice, finds himself ill-equipped when fortune turns against him. His theoretical understanding offers little comfort when he loses a job, faces illness, or endures betrayal, for he has not trained his soul to weather such storms. Furthermore, the neglect of practice fosters a disconnection from the body, as if Stoicism were purely a mental exercise. But the ancient Stoics understood the profound interrelationship between mind and body. Physical disciplines, from maintaining simple habits to enduring cold, hunger, or fatigue, were seen as essential components of philosophical training. To cultivate temperance, for instance, one must practice moderation in food, drink, and pleasure, not merely read about it. To cultivate courage, one must expose oneself to situations that provoke fear and learn to respond with steadiness. To cultivate justice, one must engage in acts of fairness and generosity, not merely affirm their value in conversation. In this sense, Stoic practice is holistic, involving thought, emotion, action, and embodiment. It is a way of being, not merely a way of thinking. To avoid this fourth major mistake, the Stoic practitioner must commit to a disciplined regimen of philosophical exercises. He must set aside time daily for reflection, self-examination, and the cultivation of virtues. He must seek out opportunities for voluntary hardship, for acts of service, for moments of ethical challenge where Stoic principles can be tested and refined. He must also cultivate relationships that support practice. As Seneca observed, one man sharpens another. Engaging with fellow practitioners, sharing reflections, offering and receiving feedback, these communal practices reinforce and deepen one's commitment to living stoically. Moreover, the Stoic must embrace humility. He must recognize that no amount of theoretical knowledge exempts him from the need for continual practice. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, get used to winnowing your thoughts, so that when someone says, "What are you thinking about?" you can answer straight away. This habit of constant self-scrutiny is the hallmark of the practicing Stoic. Finally, the Stoic must measure his progress not by how much he knows, but by how he lives. As Epictetus instructed, how long are you going to wait before you demand the best for yourself? The ultimate criterion of Stoic advancement is not fluency in Stoic jargon, but the degree to which one embodies Stoic virtues in the face of life's trials. As we prepare to move into the final block, where we will synthesize these insights and chart a course for the authentic Stoic journey, let us carry forward this essential recognition: that Stoicism is not a spectator sport, nor an intellectual parlor game, but a rigorous and transformative practice. It is a philosophy meant not to be admired from a distance, but to be lived, daily, courageously, and with unwavering commitment. The Stoic does not content himself with knowing what is right. He trains himself relentlessly to do what is right, to feel rightly, and to live rightly, no matter the circumstances. Having traversed the terrain of these four major mistakes, the suppression of emotions, the confusion of acceptance with resignation, the isolation from community, and the neglect of practice in favor of theory. We now arrive at the culmination of this exploration: how to integrate these lessons into a cohesive, authentic Stoic journey. For ultimately, the purpose of identifying these errors is not to condemn, but to illuminate; not to discourage, but to empower. The authentic Stoic journey is not defined by the absence of mistakes, but by the capacity to recognize, reflect upon, and learn from them. The Stoic understands that he is engaged in a lifelong process of self-cultivation, where each misstep becomes material for further refinement, and each success an encouragement to continue the work. The first step in this integration is to adopt the Stoic attitude of compassionate rigor toward oneself. Compassionate because the Stoic recognizes his humanity, his susceptibility to error, and his inevitable imperfection. Rigor because he holds himself to the highest standard of virtue, refusing to indulge in complacency or self-deception. Seneca captured this balance when he advised, "Be harsh with yourself at times," not to the point of self-loathing, but to maintain the vigilance necessary for moral progress. The Stoic does not expect to embody sagehood overnight, but commits himself to steady, incremental improvement, embracing the ancient maxim, prokopton, the one who makes progress. In this spirit, the Stoic approaches the first mistake, the suppression of emotion, with a renewed understanding of the role of feelings in his life. He no longer fears his emotions, nor seeks to annihilate them, but learns to observe them with curiosity, to interrogate them with reason, and to integrate them into his moral deliberations. He cultivates eupathei, good emotions, as natural outgrowths of rational judgments, allowing him to feel joy in the virtuous deeds of others, aversion toward vice, and desire for the common good. By doing so, the Stoic transforms his emotional life from a battlefield of suppression and eruption into a harmonious domain where reason guides feeling, and feeling enriches reason. The second mistake, the confusion of acceptance with resignation, is remedied by the Stoic's renewed commitment to purposeful action. He no longer uses fate as an excuse for passivity, but embraces it as the boundary within which his moral agency operates. He acts not with the desperate hope of controlling outcomes, but with the serene confidence that right action is its own reward. He recalls Marcus Aurelius's counsel, "Just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter." This liberates him from both the paralysis of perfectionism and the despair of futility, allowing him to engage with the world energetically, responsibly, and with a spirit of cheerful detachment from results. The third mistake, isolating Stoicism from community, is addressed by the Stoic's renewed recognition of his social nature. He understands that virtue is not cultivated in solitude, but in the crucible of relationships, roles, and responsibilities. He seeks out opportunities to serve, to contribute, to support others in their own quests for virtue. He practices oikeiosis, the expansion of his concern beyond himself to encompass family, friends, community, and ultimately all of humanity. He views every interaction as an opportunity to express justice, kindness, patience, and courage. Even when others fall short of virtue, he responds not with contempt or withdrawal, but with understanding and a commitment to act in accordance with his own principles. In this way, the Stoic moves beyond the myth of the solitary sage to embody the reality of the engaged citizen of the world, participating fully in the shared project of human flourishing. The fourth mistake, The neglect of practice in favor of theory is overcome by the Stoic's disciplined commitment to daily exercises. He establishes routines of reflection, premeditation, self-examination, and voluntary hardship, transforming philosophical insights into embodied habits. He recognizes that each day offers countless opportunities for practice: a delay in traffic as a chance to cultivate patience, a disagreement with a colleague as an occasion to practice humility and fairness, a personal failure as a prompt for honest self-assessment and renewed effort. For the Stoic, life itself becomes the training ground for virtue, and no moment is too small or insignificant to be excluded from philosophical practice. But beyond these specific corrections, the Stoic integrates the lessons of these mistakes into a broader meta-awareness, that the Stoic journey is not a destination but a direction, not a static achievement but a dynamic orientation. He comes to understand that Stoicism is not about becoming invulnerable or perfect, but about becoming more resilient, more discerning, more compassionate, more courageous. It is about cultivating the internal resources necessary to navigate the inevitable vicissitudes of life with integrity and grace. The authentic Stoic also recognizes that mistakes themselves are not obstacles, but opportunities. Each misinterpretation, each lapse, each failure to embody the ideal is a signal, a call to return to the core principles, to recommit to the path, and to refine one's understanding and practice. This process of continual return is beautifully encapsulated in Marcus Aurelius's own writings, where he repeatedly reminds himself to begin again, to return to reason, to remember what truly matters. The Stoic life is, above all, a life of deliberate return, a constant reorientation toward virtue. Moreover, the Stoic learns to extend the same compassionate rigor he applies to himself to others. He recognizes that all human beings are fellow travelers on the path of moral development, each grappling with their own fears, misunderstandings, and aspirations. He meets their mistakes not with condemnation but with empathy and encouragement, seeking to support their progress as he supports his own. This attitude transforms the Stoic from a detached observer of human folly into an active participant in the moral uplift of the community. He becomes a source of wisdom, stability, and inspiration for those around him, embodying the Stoic ideal not through grand pronouncements, but through quiet, consistent example. Finally, the Stoic integrates these lessons with an unwavering commitment to living in accordance with nature. Not the nature of external circumstances, which are beyond his control, but the nature of his own rational and social being. He understands that his true good lies not in pleasure, wealth, status, or even tranquility, but in the consistent exercise of reason and virtue. He seeks to align every thought, every emotion, every action with this understanding, crafting a life that is coherent, meaningful, and resilient. In doing so, the Stoic moves beyond the common caricatures of the philosophy: the emotionless suppressor, the passive fatalist, the isolated ascetic, the armchair intellectual, and steps into the authentic tradition of Stoicism, a living, breathing, dynamic practice of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. He understands that Stoicism is not an escape from life's challenges, but a preparation for them. Not a retreat from human connection, but a deepening of it. Not a rejection of emotion, but a refinement of it. Not an avoidance of action, but a commitment to right action. As he continues on this journey, the Stoic carries with him the humility to recognize that mistakes will arise, the courage to confront them, the wisdom to learn from them, and the resilience to continue forward. And so, As we conclude this reflection on the 4 major mistakes to avoid in your Stoic journey, let us remember that the ultimate aim of Stoicism is not to eliminate error, but to transform it into a catalyst for growth. Let us embrace the discipline of daily practice, the courage of engagement, the clarity of acceptance, and the wisdom of emotional integration. Let us live not as perfect Stoics, but as progressing ones, committed to the ongoing, imperfect, beautiful work of becoming who we are meant to be: rational, social, virtuous human beings, fully engaged in the art of living well. Now, if any part of this message has been helpful to you, leave us your like and comment, helping the algorithm recommend it to someone who needs it at this time. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new videos. And if you look through the videos we've already uploaded, you're sure to find something to take with you. Have a good day.